The rain had a way of magnifying her solitude. It splattered against the cracked pavement like tiny accusations, each droplet echoing years of whispered judgments, silent reproaches, and cold, disappointed glances. Zariah stood under the dim light of a flickering street lamp, her umbrella torn at the edges, clinging to her fragile shield from the storm. At 28, she had learned to navigate life the way she navigated the city streets in the rain, cautiously, quietly, and always with her guard up. From the very beginning, Zariah's life had been an uphill climb, one that seemed designed to test every ounce of her resilience. Her parents, successful and stern, had always expected perfection. To them, her black skin, her stubborn independence, her quiet dreams were obstacles rather than blessings. "Why can't you be more like your cousins?" her mother would snap during dinner, the words sharp and cutting, lodged in her chest like broken glass. Her childhood home had never been warm. Laughter was rare, kindness scarcer. Gifts and praise were currency she never received, replaced instead by criticism, comparison, and the constant pressure to conform. And yet, Zariah had dreams, small ones perhaps, but hers nonetheless. She wanted to study literature, write stories that mattered, and one day escape the relentless shadows of disapproval. But life had a cruel way of testing dreams. By the time she reached adolescence, Soraya had learned that the world outside her family was just as unforgiving. Teachers overlooked her, friends drifted away when life got tough, and society's biases whispered constantly in her ear, "You are not enough. Not smart enough, not pretty enough, not worthy enough." Her only sanctuary was writing. Pages and pages of stories, scribbled in battered notebooks, became her secret companions. She wrote about brave women who fought battles no one else noticed, who carved paths through darkness and emerged into sunlight. Sometimes, when the world felt unbearable, she would read her own words aloud to herself, imagining a life where she was celebrated, not scorned. By the time she entered college, Soraya had become skilled at masking her pain. She smiled, laughed when required, and kept her ambitions hidden beneath layers of humility. But even here, shadows followed. Scholarships were denied, opportunities slipped through her fingers. Every step forward seemed to require her to carry a boulder of expectation and disappointment. And the weight was exhausting. Yet, in the darkest corridors of her struggle, Soraya discovered fragments of hope. A professor who recognized her talent, a friend who saw past her smile to the fire beneath, a small community of writers who applauded her work. These were the lights in the darkness, delicate and fleeting, but enough to make her keep moving forward. Then came the day that changed everything. A letter, crisp and official, arrived at her mailbox. She tore it open with trembling hands and read the words that would either be the end of her struggle or the beginning of a new battle. "We are pleased to offer you a place in the International Writers' Fellowship in Paris." For a moment, the room spun. This was it. The recognition she had been chasing all her life. The validation that even her family had never provided. But as she pictured the news breaking to her parents, the old familiar dread returned. Their disapproval, their cold judgment, even at a distance, had a way of clinging to her like shadows at noon. Would they ever be happy for her, or was this success just another thing to criticize? Suspense hung over her like the storm clouds outside. She could leave, chase her dreams, and finally step out from under the suffocating expectations of home. Or she could stay, continue to bear the weight of her family's unhappiness, and risk losing herself in the process. That night, Soraya sat at her desk, pen in hand, and realized something profound. She had spent her entire life writing stories for everyone else's approval. Now it was time to write one for herself. The rain finally stopped. Outside, the city felt cleaner somehow, as if the storm had washed away more than just dirt. And in that quiet aftermath, Soraya made a decision that would change everything. The morning sunlight was harsh, slicing through the thin curtains of her room. Soraya sat on the edge of her bed, the acceptance letter clutched tightly in her hands. It was heavy, though not with paper. It was heavy with possibility, fear, and the weight of expectation. She had rehearsed this moment in her mind 1,000 times, yet nothing could have prepared her for the tension that gripped her chest now. Her mother, Lydia, always had a way of sensing when something was different. Today, that sharp gaze had landed on Soraya the moment she entered the kitchen. "What's that in your hands?" she demanded, her voice tight. Soraya hesitated. She considered hiding it, slipping it quietly into her bag, but the envelope was too thick, too obvious. Slowly, she placed it on the table. Her mother's eyes scanned the paper. There was no immediate smile, no warm congratulations. Instead, there was a pause, a narrowing of eyes, a tightening of lips. "Paris? That's far. And expensive. Are you sure this is practical?" Her father, David, walked in, his presence imposing as always. "Practical? Practical is paying your bills, Soraya. Writing stories, that's not a career. It's a hobby." The words stabbed, as they always did. Her dream, the one she had nurtured in silence for decades, suddenly felt fragile under their scrutiny. She had rehearsed this moment in her mind 1,000 times, yet nothing could have prepared her for the tension that gripped her chest now. I I worked hard for this," she whispered, her voice shaking. "This is an opportunity, a chance to prove myself, to write for people who care." Her mother's face hardened. "We raised you to be responsible, not this. You should be focusing on stability, not chasing fantasies." Soraya wanted to shout, to scream, to throw the letter across the room, but instead she said nothing. The silence between them was suffocating, but it was familiar, always familiar. Paris was overwhelming. The streets buzzed with life, the air thick with possibility and new beginnings. Zoraya's heart raced as she walked past cafes, bookstores, and artists sketching in the sunlight. She felt small in this vast world, but for the first time, it was a good kind of small, a smallness that promised growth. Her days were consumed with workshops, writing exercises, and long walks through the city. Every corner held inspiration, every stranger a potential story. Slowly, the writer she had been hiding at home began to emerge fully. But success was not without struggle. Late nights spent editing manuscripts, living in a tiny apartment with leaking pipes, and facing the subtle prejudices of people who underestimated her because of her skin and background, tested her resolve. Yet, with every challenge, she grew more determined. She was no longer running from her family's disapproval. She was running toward her own life, and that made all the difference. Months later, Soraya received an email that would change everything. A publisher wanted to see her manuscript. Her stories, born from loneliness, struggle, and heartbreak, were finally being recognized. She felt a surge of triumph, but it was tempered with reflection. She thought of her parents. Of course, they had never believed in her, but their shadows no longer defined her. She had fought for herself against every doubt and every insult, and she had won. Standing on the balcony of her small Paris apartment, Soraya looked out over the city lights and whispered to herself, "I am enough." For the first time in her life, she believed it. Zoraya's earliest memory was of cold floors and harsher words. She was 6, sitting cross-legged on the chipped wooden floor of the kitchen, staring at the faint stain of last week's spilled juice. Her mother's voice cut through the air like glass. "Why can't you sit properly, Zariah? Always making a mess." Her small hands trembled. She had tried to wipe the stain with the rag, but it was never enough. Nothing she did was ever enough. Her father, David, didn't even look up from his newspaper. "Sit still, girl. You'll never amount to anything if you keep fidgeting like that." Even at that age, Zariah understood the truth in his words. Not that they were correct, but that her family didn't see her worth. Her skin, dark as the night outside their small apartment window, often drew side glances from her relatives. It wasn't spoken aloud, but in a house where achievement was measured in perfection, beauty, and conformity, Zariah's black skin, her quiet persistence, and her curiosity were inconvenient. So she hid. She hid in books, in stories, in scraps of paper tucked under her mattress. She wrote about worlds where girls like her were celebrated, where parents clapped for every little triumph instead of criticizing it. Yet, the scars of disapproval ran deep. Every time her mother called her cousins gifted or clever, a dull ache settled in her chest. Zariah learned early. Love from her family wasn't a given. It was something she had to fight for, silently, invisibly, alone. School wasn't easier. Teachers overlooked her ideas, classmates whispered about her behind her back, and opportunities seemed to vanish before she could grasp them. "Zariah, you're quiet, aren't you?" her teacher said one day, almost sympathetically. "Maybe you should try participating more." It wasn't sympathy, it was doubt. Participation required confidence, and confidence had never been nurtured in her home. Every rejection stung. A lost scholarship, a class project ignored, an award given to someone else. Yet in each failure, Zariah found the faint flicker of resilience. She wrote late into the night, her desk lamp casting long shadows across the walls. Every story, every poem, every secret notebook became a refuge. By the time she was 13, Zariah had created entire worlds in which she belonged. Worlds where her skin was beautiful, her ideas brilliant, and her family's absence of praise didn't matter. Zariah's home life was a battlefield. Her younger siblings, easier to mold in the image her parents desired, were celebrated for every minor success. Birthdays were a reminder of her place in the hierarchy of approval. "You should take lessons in music or dance," her mother suggested one evening. "Why do you waste your time with those childish stories?" Zariah clenched her fists beneath the table. Music and dance weren't her dreams. Writing was her world, her sanctuary. Yet every word she wrote was accompanied by guilt. A guilt her parents had instilled over years of criticism. Her father's approval was even rarer. "If you keep dreaming about stories, you'll end up with nothing. Life is practical, Zariah, not poetic nonsense." And so she learned to hide her victories, to keep her talents secret, to wear the mask of obedience while her soul burned quietly for recognition. High school brought small victories. A teacher, Miss Renard, noticed Zariah's skill with words. "You have a gift," she said quietly one afternoon, sliding a composition back across the desk. "Don't let anyone dim it, especially not at home." For the first time, someone outside her family recognized her worth. It was intoxicating and terrifying. Could she trust the world more than her parents? Could she finally believe in herself? She began submitting essays, stories, and poems to contests. Rejections came, yes, but also small wins. A magazine published one of her stories, and for a fleeting moment, she felt seen, not just by strangers, but by herself. And then came the day that would change everything. Zariah returned from college one gray afternoon to find an envelope waiting on her desk. She tore it open, hands shaking. Inside, the official letter read, "We are pleased to offer you a place in the International Writers' Fellowship in Paris. This is a unique opportunity to study and write among some of the finest emerging voices in the literary world." Her chest constricted. Paris, opportunity, escape, validation. The joy was immediate, but so was the fear. Her parents would not approve. They never had. The thought of confronting them, of breaking the mold they had forced her into, sent a cold shiver down her spine. Her mother's voice echoed in her head. Practical, Zariah, always practical. Her father's, stories won't pay your bills. And yet, as she stared at the letter, Zariah felt something she had never felt so vividly before. Hope. Not fragile, not fleeting, but powerful, undeniable, and terrifyingly liberating. The storm outside had passed, leaving a quiet clarity. Zariah picked up her pen and notebook and wrote a single word across the page. Yes. For the first time, she was choosing herself. The airport was a sea of chaos, rolling luggage, crowded terminals, announcements echoing in multiple languages. But Zariah felt only a single pulse of calm determination. Her suitcase rattled behind her as she wheeled it through the sliding doors. Each step forward was a step away from a home that had never truly welcomed her. Her parents were waiting, faces carefully neutral, the masks of restraint hiding emotions she could never decipher. Her mother's hands trembled slightly as she passed Zariah's ticket. "Be careful," Lydia said, the word hanging in the air like a challenge. Her father, as stoic as ever, added, "Don't waste this chance. Remember what I said about practicality." Zariah nodded, her throat tight. She wanted to argue, to tell them that practicality wasn't worth the cost of a life unlived, but the words caught in her chest. Instead, she smiled politely, turned, and walked toward the gate. Inside, as she glanced back at the security line, she saw her mother wiping a tear. Her father's jaw was tight. And then, just as quickly as it appeared, they were gone. Zariah let out a shaky breath. Freedom felt heavy, strange, and exhilarating all at once. The city hit her like a tidal wave. Cobblestone streets, ornate balconies, the smell of fresh bread from corner boulangeries. It was beautiful, dizzying, and utterly unfamiliar. Her apartment was tiny, barely bigger than her old childhood bedroom, with a single window that looked out onto a narrow alley. Pipes groaned, and the walls were thin enough to hear neighbors whispering across apartments, but it was hers. It was a start. The first weeks were difficult. Classes were intense, professors demanding, and her accent betrayed her at every turn. Simple tasks like grocery shopping or navigating the metro became minor adventures filled with anxiety. But Zariah thrived on challenge. Every moment of discomfort was a reminder that she was truly out in the world, shaping her own path. Late at night, she sat at her small desk, Paris lights glowing through the window, and wrote furiously. Her stories grew bolder, darker, more personal. Each word was a small rebellion against the life she had left behind. Each page a defiance of the family who never believed in her. Zariah found her people in the most unexpected places. At the first workshop, she met Amina, a fellow writer from Morocco, who had faced similar struggles. Amina's laughter was infectious, her optimism fierce. "You belong here, Zariah. Don't let anyone tell you that," said Amina, handing her a cup of coffee after their first critique session. Then there was Professor Lang, an elderly writer who saw past her nerves and hesitations. "Your words are alive," he told her one evening. "They have fire. Don't dim it to make others comfortable." Even a quiet cafe owner, Monsieur René, became a confidant. He always saved her a table by the window, where she could write for hours uninterrupted, sipping espresso as the city hummed around her. For the first time, Zariah felt seen, not by family, not by strangers online, but by people who understood her value, her potential, and her unrelenting spirit. It wasn't easy. Weeks of rejection letters arrived, each one a sting. Publishers dismissed her manuscripts, competitions ended without recognition, and at times loneliness gnawed at her resolve. But small victories began to stack up. A short story was published in a literary journal, a professor praised her work in a seminar, and Amina celebrated every minor accomplishment as if it were a national holiday. Zoraya started attending literary salons, meeting influential writers, and finding mentors who encouraged her to submit her stories to bigger publishers. Every rejection now felt less like failure and more like a stepping stone. One rainy evening, she received an email. A publisher wanted to see her complete manuscript. Her heart raced, but this time there was no doubt. She belonged here. The suspense of waiting for their decision kept her awake for nights, but she thrived in it. Her family began to reach out. Her mother's letters were polite, carefully worded, almost formal. "We hope you are doing well. Paris must be challenging. Please remember to eat and sleep properly." Her father's letters were shorter, practical. "Make sure you're managing your finances. Writing is fine, but don't neglect responsibilities." Zoraya read each one, a swirl of emotions inside her. Loneliness, relief, anger, and amusement. Her parents were trying, in their own flawed way, to connect. And for the first time, she didn't feel obligated to change herself to earn their approval. She could love them from a distance and still live her life. At night, she walked along the Seine, notebook in hand, reflecting on how far she had come. The city's lights shimmered on the water, each reflection a promise that her story was just beginning. Suspense lingered in her chest. Would the publisher accept her manuscript? Would her family ever truly understand her? Could she sustain her independence without losing herself? But for the first time, Zoraya felt ready to face it all. Paris had been intoxicating, but the city's glamour came with shadows. Zoraya quickly learned that not everyone she met had pure intentions. During a prestigious workshop, a fellow writer, Camille, whispered about Zoraya's work behind her back, mocking the personal depth of her stories. "She's so dramatic. Who writes about family pain like that?" Zoraya overheard. Anger bubbled inside her, but she restrained it. She realized that envy and cruelty were universal. Even in a city where she felt accepted, she would face opposition. Her first serious rejection came from a respected publisher. They cited lack of marketable appeal, dismissing the stories she had poured her soul into. For a moment, all the doubts she had fought to silence about her talent, her worth, her identity, rose like a tidal wave. She considered giving up. The weight of failure, the endless nights, the loneliness, it felt unbearable. Late one night, Zoraya sat at her tiny apartment desk, rain lashing against the window, tears streaking her face. Her notebook lay open, words blurred by despair. Memories flooded back. Her mother's constant criticism, her father's cold judgment, the loneliness of childhood, the endless comparisons to cousins and classmates. Each memory threatened to drown her, to convince her that she was nothing more than her family had always said. Yet somewhere in the darkness, a quiet voice whispered, "You've come this far. You are stronger than you think." She picked up her pen and wrote until the ink ran dry. She wrote of pain, of betrayal, of loneliness. She wrote until she realized something profound. The very struggles that had tried to break her were the foundation of her strength. The next day, she submitted her manuscript again, this time to a smaller but highly respected publishing house. Her hands shook as she clicked send, but there was no fear now, only resolve. Weeks later, an email arrived. Zoraya held her breath as she read, "We would like to publish your manuscript. Your voice is powerful, authentic, and necessary. We believe readers will connect deeply with your work." For a moment, the world stopped. The rejection letters, the whispered critiques, the sleepless nights, all of it faded. She had made it. She had fought and she had won. She called Amina immediately, tears streaming down her face. "They're going to publish it. I I can't believe it." Amina laughed through the phone. "I always knew you could do it. Now the world will know too." Zariah's first real triumph felt like sunlight breaking through decades of shadows. Her parents visited Paris shortly after the news. Curiosity and skepticism etched into their faces. Zariah invited them to her apartment, where the manuscript lay proudly on her desk. Her mother's eyes lingered on the cover. "I didn't realize," she began, voice faltering. Her father cleared his throat, trying to hide his emotions. "So, you really did it?" Zariah looked at them, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and sorrow. "I did," she said. "I wrote my stories, followed my dreams, and finally believed in myself. And this is what I've earned, without needing anyone's approval." Her mother's lips quivered. We we didn't understand. We thought you didn't understand me, but that's okay. I understand myself now." For the first time, the family saw her not as a disappointment, but as a force of nature. Whether they fully accepted or not, Zariah no longer needed validation. She had claimed her life. Over time, their relationship softened. Visits became easier, conversations warmer, though old habits never completely disappeared. Zariah set boundaries, choosing love without compromise. Her book launched to critical acclaim. Readers resonated with her words, writing to her about their own struggles and triumphs. Zariah realized that her stories had power, not just to entertain, but to heal, to inspire, to illuminate the shadows she had once lived under. One evening, sitting on her Paris balcony with a cup of tea, she looked at the city lights reflecting on the Seine. She had faced rejection, betrayal, and family disapproval, but she had survived, grown, and emerged stronger. The trials of fire had forged her into the woman she always meant to be. The day her book was officially published, Zariah woke before dawn, heart pounding. She held the first copy in her hands, its cover glossy, her name printed boldly. It was real. Every struggle, every sleepless night, every tear, every battle with doubt had led to this moment. The literary world took notice quickly. Reviews praised her voice, her courage, and the raw honesty of her writing. Readers wrote letters from across the globe, sharing how her stories reflected their own pain and resilience. Zariah realized that the very experiences her family had dismissed, the loneliness, the struggle, the silent endurance, were exactly what made her words so powerful. For the first time, she felt truly recognized, not by relatives, not by acquaintances, but by a world that valued authenticity and heart. Awards followed, invitations to literary festivals arrived, and soon Zariah was speaking on panels, mentoring younger writers, and giving talks about overcoming adversity. She saw herself reflected in the young writer's eyes, hopeful, determined, searching for someone who believed in them. One evening, after a particularly inspiring panel, a student approached her with tears in her eyes. "I read your books," she said. I felt like you were speaking to me. Thank you." Zariah smiled, realizing this was the true victory. Success wasn't about fame or money, it was about impact. She had turned her pain into light, and in doing so, she had given others courage. Through her journey, Zariah's relationships deepened. Amina remained her unwavering friend, her confidant, her cheerleader. Their bond, forged in late-night writing sessions and shared struggles, became a foundation of trust and love. Then there was Julian, a fellow writer she had met at a literary salon. Initially playful, teasing, and critical, he soon became a partner in creativity and life. He challenged her, supported her, and loved her, not for perfection, but for the woman she had fought to become. Through friendships and romance, Zariah discovered that connection wasn't about judgment or approval. It was about understanding and mutual respect. She finally had a circle of people who saw her, truly saw her, and celebrated her for who she was. After years abroad, Zariah returned home briefly, not for validation, but for closure. Her parents were older, their criticisms softened by time and the undeniable evidence of her achievements. The Seine reflected the golden glow of the city lights, shimmering like fragments of hope scattered across the water. Zariah stood on her balcony, the notebook in her hands, pages filled with the stories that had carried her through a lifetime of struggle. Paris was quiet tonight, yet it buzzed with the energy of possibility, the same energy that had drawn her here years ago, uncertain, afraid, yet determined. She thought of her childhood home, the harsh words, the cold disapproval, the constant comparisons to her cousins. For so long, those shadows had defined her. Every failure felt heavier because it was measured against a family that never celebrated her victories, a family whose love had always come with conditions. And yet, here she was. Her book had been published. Readers from across the world wrote to her, sharing how her words had healed them, inspired them, and given them courage. She had mentors who believed in her, friends who celebrated her, and love that challenged and supported her. She had survived betrayal, rejection, and self-doubt, and emerged stronger, unbroken, luminous in her own worth. A gentle breeze carried the faint scent of fresh bread from the boulangerie below. Zariah closed her eyes, letting it wash over her. For the first time, she felt truly free, not because the world had recognized her, but because she had recognized herself. She remembered the little girl who had once hidden notebooks under her mattress, trembling at the world's judgments. That girl had been afraid, invisible, longing for approval she would never receive. But that girl had grown into a woman who refused to be diminished, who had taken the pain and the shadows and transformed them into light. Zariah opened her notebook and began to write. Not for validation, not for recognition, but for herself. The ink flowed freely, each word a declaration. I am enough. I am seen. I am free. And in the quiet of the Paris night, she smiled. A smile not born of relief, but of triumph, peace, and self-acceptance. The shadows of her past no longer had power over her. They were memories, lessons, and fuel for the fire that now burned steadily inside her. Her journey had not been easy. The road had been strewn with criticism, rejection, loneliness, and doubt. But now, standing on the balcony, notebook in hand, heart full of hope, Zariah understood the truth that had taken her a lifetime to learn. The only approval she needed had always been her own. She whispered to the night, softly but firmly, I am enough. I always was. And for the first time, she believed it completely. The city lights flickered, the Seine shimmered, and Paris hummed gently beneath her. The shadows had receded. The light was hers, and it would never fade.